Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
Well, I guess we should say welcome to the first episode of the Wordy Pair Podcast. At least that's what we're trying to do here. I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin.
And we are both kind of writers, I guess?
Kind of. Didn't we have an acronym for that? The 2WA?
Yeah. So yeah, we are going to be talking about writing, about different things, and we're also going to be creating, not live because we're not transmitting this out anywhere live, but we're going to be recording the creation of stuff that we're going to inevitably put up as kind of like public domain things that you can use as seed ideas for your own stories or ideas or fiction or whatever. So that's kind of where we're at. We have not planned too much for this, so we're going to be a little bit seat of the pants.
We have planned 0 for this.
Not quite 0. I have like 10 words written in a notepad document.
In the world of writing, 10 words is roughly 0.
Yes, you're right.
Even in the world of podcasting, it's almost 0.
So yes.
Literally, the name is Wordy Pair. You can't just say, we're the Wordy Pair. Have a word like wordy, meaning excessively overworded, and then say 10 words are on a piece of paper.
It's not a piece of paper. It's a notepad document, all right? Let's be clear.
So we've literally written nothing down. Pretty
much. But what the 10 words are a couple of topics that we thought we would talk about. And the first idea that I had pitched a while back for an episode of this show was for us to. So this is back a few months ago when a workshop who produces games was having another hissy fit about its intellectual property, which is already all incredibly derivative on its face, and yet they were trying to claim excessive ownership of the ideas that went into their moderately good lore, deep, grimdark world, or world that is dark and grim. Sorry. and the idea was to kind of put together a grimdark world from scratch and just kind of put it out to the community as something for games, for like tabletop games, the rules, you can't really trademark or copyright a set of rules and expect variations to not be valid for other people to copyright. And so like it was an idea that we had that was kind of like, but it's also pretty easy to put together a basic grimdark storyline and throw that all together. So if you wanted to say create a like a public domain, we'll just say 38,000 years from now, the story, and we were gonna kind of try to put something together for that. And so the seed idea I had for this was that there were 5 mass extinctions in world history, something like that.
Let's go with that.
But I'm gonna actually kind of look this up.
Were there actually 5?
Yeah, 5 mass extinctions in Earth's history. So there was one that happened. Let's see if I can get a little bit of data here for us. There's one that happened Why is this not just listed by my years? Okay,
Because
here we
nobody
go.
knows how to science anymore.
There was one about 440 million years ago. Then another one 360 million years ago. Then another one before that 250, 265. So we've had these 5 mass extinctions, and my idea was that these weren't just mass extinctions, that they were the ends of a civilization, right? That the creatures that had built up had decided to leave for whatever reason, or they had perceived that a meteor was coming, and they escaped the Earth. The Earth was wiped clean, and then evolution started again, and things moved forward from there. And this happened repeatedly, right?
Okay, let me stop you there. Let me stop you there. Just as an aside, it is really, I'm not going to say creepy. There's nothing really creepy about it. It is fascinating to me that you are just like throwing this out there semi off the cuff, or having previously thought this over months ago, I'm guessing.
A little bit,
and that is actually the topic of a short story I am working on right now that I'm going to throw up as a prompt for Iron Age Media.
Okay. Well, I mean, we've talked about this. We talked about this specific idea months ago, so I'm sure you've
well, no, we never talked about your mass extinction idea, though.
I mentioned it to you. Yes, I did.
Did you? Oh,
yes,
well,
indeed.
Well, the story I'm writing is a little bit of a different take on it, but
it's fine. This is
it's just funny that's like I was in the middle of writing that last night, and it's like, oh, and this is what we're talking about today. Okay,
exactly. So the idea is that each of these mass extinction events created a race of highly advanced creatures of whatever was dominant at the time, and therefore, and all of these creatures left, and that at some point they come back because they're like, well, things should have cooled down by then, and they didn't. They either anticipated they would be more advanced than whatever was left behind, or that they would simply be able to win out over what was left behind, right? And so, I mean, so we can kind of get this and we can kind of fill it in, but basically, what do we need? We need 5 different creature civilizations. So we'll start going backwards. The 65 million year ago one was the one that killed off the dinosaurs. So, obviously one of these races coming back would be some kind of highly evolved lizard creature of some sort, right? Or maybe even a bird-like creature for dinosaurs, right? We could look at the end of the Triassic period, 200 million years ago, where people mistake this as the event that killed off the dinosaurs, and so we could have Proto-Avian and Proto-Reptilian for those two, and then we have the Permian, Devonian, and Ordovician things, extinction events, and what would we be going back from there? We'd be going back to amphibians, and maybe even like single-cell organisms or plant organisms or something like that. But the idea would be that you would have 5 different types of creature that had developed space travel, had left the Earth, had gone off into the void of space, found whatever they were going to find out there. There's another aspect, too. You could discover that each group found each other, or maybe they went in different directions just by pure coincidence, or you could have them go in... or you could have them already be at war when they come back to Earth and know that that's part of the issue. You could have them finding weird stuff in space, Lovecraftian, Great Old One kind of style stuff.
The really fun stuff. Yeah, no, this is the part that, like, more than anything, from a writing perspective, when you're trying to create some kind of world like this for people to get into, this is where you really want to let the creativity go wild. Like, do you want to have one race that is superior to all the other ones? Do you want to have 2 that are pretty balanced out, and so they kind of like vie back and forth for power? Do you actually want to have races that are, completely at peace with one another, but things keep interfering with them from the outside? There's like a million different ways you can really toggle just 5, general races of creatures in a story like this.
Yeah, and of course, then there's also the details of when they came back to Earth. What the diplomatic situation was as they came back to Earth, how things fell apart, Whether some of them came back at the same time or whether they all came back one at a time. There's a lot of interesting things you could play around with there. So where do we? How do we want to broaden this out? What do we want to do? Do we want to go deeper? Do we want to go wider? How do we want to mess with this? What sounds good to you?
It depends. Are we actually going to? Obviously, we're not going to sit down and come up with rules like you need this many dice for this kind of thing in this particular.
No, not game rules.
Manner.
Just
Yeah,
like
just
I
like,
mean, just the idea is to create back lore, or to demonstrate that it's not that difficult to create some new back lore for for a game that someone might develop, kind of thing.
All right, well, piece of cake. So let's see. Let's take the dinosaurs.
All right.
So, generally, when I'm trying to come up with an entire universe of things, I'll take a basic idea and maybe mix in a little knowledge of something I know about something else, and I will say, okay, I'll take really, really sparse pieces of this, and I'll apply it to what I'm creating. So, like with the dinosaurs, just because I thought of a funny name a while back when I was talking to someone about whether or not the Brontosaurus was a real dinosaur. I'm sure I don't know how much you know about dinosaurs, but I'm guessing you know the whole Brontosaur, Brachiosaur kind of thing.
I mean, there was a controversy. People thought that the Brontosaur was a separate thing, and then people thought that it wasn't. And nowadays, it seems like they're coming back to saying that it might have been something different.
Yeah, because I know there were lots of different like long neck dinosaurs. I mean, there was the Diplodocus,
Sure.
which I never really got a clear answer from anyone about if the Diplodocus was even related to them in any significant way. That maybe they were just smaller versions of the same thing. I don't know. I'm pretty sure the bone structure was different, but
Sure.
like, there was that whole thing where the Brontosaur. Okay, well, I'm getting off topic. The point is,
so this is interesting because you're making a point about convergent evolution, right? That different species even without them there being like interbreeding or like genetic similarities between them, that they can evolutionary push in the same direction because they face the same incentives to evolve in that direction, right? So if you sent two different types of creatures to a world in which all the trees were very tall, then those two creatures would both evolve towards being taller over time, because the shorter individuals would die out and the taller ones would flourish. And even if they weren't genetically related to each other, and even if they weren't interbreeding, that effect would cause them both to become taller over millions of years, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean that's not the point I was making, but that is a good point.
Well, no, but that's what I mean. That's one possible explanation for the Diplodocus versus the Brachiosaur.
Yeah,
Two different lineages of creatures were both encouraged to assume similar body shapes because of similar evolutionary pressures.
Yeah, so taking well, I guess I'm kind of like jumping back to what I was originally going to say, because
Sure.
you kind of said everything there was to say on that subject. But just from that, it's like, okay, so what do I know about? What's some weird thing that I know about? And I was thinking about this the other day when I had that conversation about the dinosaurs, and I think I actually used this term. I came up with the idea for a race of creatures called the Dino-Naki, which is a take on the theory that there was a race of people that created mankind called the Anunnaki, or that historically there was some visitor from outer space that created a lot of the technology that explains some ancient mysteries that people weren't able to give an exact answer for. And I thought it was a pretty funny idea. Like, obviously I was born in the 80s, so I remember things like dino saucers and weird cartoons like that. And so I kind of had this mental image of this race of dinosaurs that left Earth and came back later on, and they were more human-like, but they were clearly reptilian in nature, and I was just like, yeah, I'd call them the Dino-Naki.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've already got a name for a race, and then you just think about, well, what does that imply? And then if you go and read the Anunnaki stuff, it's like, okay, you would want them to be, if you wanted to make them similar to that, if you wanted to use any influence from that at all, then you could make the case that, well, okay, so the Dino-Naki actually created humanity, and that's where humanity came from. And so then you have a secondary race in the humans that at some point also travel the stars and meet up with their creators. And, whatever happens there, they could be enemies, they could be friends, they could avoid each other, they could be bitterly jealous of, like maybe the humans figured out a technology that the Dino-Naki never could, and maybe the Dino-Naki have such advanced technology that the humans would like to have it, but they can't quite reach that diplomacy level or something. But like, this is all like this is the brainstorming process. You can sit there and write different ideas down, or you can just you can take one idea and just run with it and see where you end up with it after like 20 pages. This is the universe creating project. You don't sit down when you're trying to do a grand scale endeavor like creating a universe for your characters to live in. It's not usually a good idea to start with one character and work out every detail about that one character, unless your method is going to be to work out one character and then decide what kind of universe would give you that kind of character.
Yeah.
So, it's just like, you don't have to box yourself into using one method of creating a world if you're trying to create a workshop of games, so to speak.
Or a world that is dark and also grim.
Yes, well, I guess we could call it a sort of morose universe.
Yeah, sure. There are some story points that you want to kick up for the purposes of like the game, right? Like, you would not want to have everything to have been solved by diplomacy for a dice throwing combat simulation kind of strategy.
It depends. Game, you could, but you would also want to have some kind of disaster that is outside the power of those who are trying to be diplomatic.
Right.
The entire back history of every single one of those 5 races could be one of diplomacy, and one large disaster turned that all around and pitted them all against each other in a giant war.
Or just because of scarcity, that the sixth event happens, and the resources become so scarce that all of the races end up pitted against each other willy-nilly, and you end up with this kind of race to the bottom.
Yes, and you could do interesting things with them. Like, you could have one race that operates largely on principle and doesn't go to war with the other 4 because they think that they should still maintain. So they think that even in the worst situation, they should uphold their principles, and so the other 4 basically, drain them of their resources and are basically killing off this one race just because they can easily get away with it. But they all have an interest in keeping this one race around because it's like, ooh, free stuff from them, because they'll always like us. So all 4 of them actually have a reason to prevent disaster from happening to this one race.
While at the same time maintaining them at a certain level where without giving them too much or taking away too much at the same time. Yeah.
So it kind of just creates this necessity for 4 of them to actually engage in some minimal form of diplomacy, even if they would prefer to just eradicate all their enemies.
Right. So, what about naming conventions?
Okay, so you should start this one off, because my naming conventions, and my naming conventions are a little wacky and out there.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. My naming conventions are definitely... Well, it depends on what I'm writing, of course. But what I've mostly been writing has been, future science fiction stuff. And, the way that I imagine the world proceeding in the time between now and the hypothetical story affects how I, make name choices. But, my general idea has been to take a lot of inspiration, so to speak, from modern real life names of varying nations of origin, and maybe play with the spelling or a little bit like that or something like that, just because I'm dealing with characters who are all humans, who all have relatively similar cultural background, that kind of thing. So there's while there's diversity in the countries of origin, there's not a lot of names that are especially hard to pronounce or you know not accessible to an English speaker, basically. But your system is much more amenable to dealing with like fantasy races or things that are way out there. So, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I usually mix and match my different naming conventions, and I try to do something a little bit different. So let's see. Okay, so like I had a race of aliens in a book I wrote that were called the Melnin, the Melnin, and the way I came up with the name was actually really simple. I just thought, okay, what are aliens that I'm aware of? And the first one that came to mind was Alf from the old TV show Alf, who was from Melmac. And so I took the name Melmac and I said, I'll keep the Mel, and then I just ran I ran the 26 letters of the alphabet through my head. And when I got to N, I was like, Melnin, I'll call him Melnin. That's all I did. That was it. That was the extent of my thinking about it.
So they went from the Melmacs to the Melmins. Yes.
They were they weren't a race like Alf. They were, my own race, but that's where I got the name from. And then I would do silly things like the captain of the ship in that story is called Milk Muffin. That's her name. Right. And when I came up with that one, I was like, all right, let's try to stick with a bit of a theme there. So when I came up with the second character for the story, I was like, all right, we're just going to use some weird nouns and object, like weird object names for things. So I ended up calling her Country Kitchen. And then because I had two really weird names like that, I made one of the gags in the story that Country Kitchen thinks that everyone else kind of has weird names and that she's really the only one with a normal name. So she references Milk Muffin's name several times as, why does she have such a weird name? Why can't she have a normal name like Country Kitchen? Right. And actually in that same story, I had I had a character that was called Colas, Colace, and then I did a whole, like, I think 2-page joke about his family, all of them having their names end in ACE, but the beginnings of their names, since his was COL, it was short for Colonel, and so there was a Lewis in his family that was short for Lieutenant, and an Admiral, short for Admiral. So they all ended in ace and all had abbreviations for military titles.
So you either write your names based on the fact that you're hungry at the time, and you're thinking of Milk Muffins or Country Kitchens.
Yes, or I'm warlike at the time.
and you decide to throw ranks at things. Well, there's a lot of wordplay there, which is
yeah, I do a lot of wordplay in the names. 90% of the names, though, at least 90% of them are just me doing the whole running the 26 letters of the alphabet through my head, and seeing what makes me think it'll stick for a character. Like I have my nickname online is Muppy Heingart, and you were there when I invented that one. Yes. That was just like, well, what would this character actually be named? Like, just based on what it looks like. What's a funny group of syllables that if I run together I could see this character having as a name? And that was what happened. I know I've used some other weird ways of naming characters before, but, I don't think there's not really a good trick for it. There's just like, you have a character, imagine the character in your head, and imagine a name that wouldn't look completely outrageous for that character to have. That's the extent of how far I think about it. I just, I'll spend 5 or 10 minutes coming up with a name for each character that I create. And once I get one that I'm like, yep, I could see that character having that name, I'll run with it. One of my favorite ones was, so one of my favorite characters from anime was Lena Inverse, and I wanted to do a sorceress character. So I chose her name to kind of base the character off of. Yep. And instead of having a Lena, I had an Ibralina. But I kind of wanted to hint that I had stolen the idea from the character from Lena Inverse. Sure. So I would have all of the characters constantly use a different syllable in her name. as her nickname, and she would get angry about it. Like, they would call her Ebri, or they'd call her Brelly, or they'd call her, they would outright call her at one point, I think 2 or 3 times, they called her Lena outright. And she would always, get angry and stamp her feet and be like, I'm not a child, call me by my full name.
Right.
But, that's the thing, though. It's like the more fun you make it to name the stuff, the more you kind of get into it. So, like the way you do it, where you take slight variations on things, makes it more interesting for the reader as well. They're not just seeing John and Tom and Bill. The names that half the time, if you try to think back to characters in books that have these really ordinary names, depending on where you're from,
sure,
you're not going to remember them. And then I think even if you're like a foreign reader of an English book, you might not remember the names particularly well, because I know that if I'm reading a book that has both a Sakura and a Sakurako from Japan, that I'm probably going to get them mixed up 5 or 6 times before I finally commit them to memory.
Yeah, I have the same problem in the sense that character names will run together, especially if they are... I mean, it's one thing for it to be... Well, so I guess this is interesting because, like, different cultures will have different systematics that appear in their names that kind of stick together. And, like, if you're not familiar with those systematics, you can easily get confused name to name from names that come out of that same culture. But one of the advantages of kind of not having that background in the sense of, like, creating a name from scratch is that you don't have to worry about some people recognizing the name and remembering it very well and other people not remembering it. They'll either remember it or they won't. And if they don't, well, then maybe you should try a different name, but maybe not.
There's also a lot to be said for... I've read a lot of things that they just weren't interesting enough for me to commit the characters to memory.
Yeah.
So that sometimes plays a role. But I mean, I've read really good books where I tried to think back to the names of characters. I mean, same thing happens when I watch anime. If it's not a name that really strikes me as something that I don't see too often, or if the name isn't repeated very much in a story as well, chances are you might think back to even a main character at times. I've been like, what was that character's name?
Yes.
Or when characters have nicknames and it becomes difficult to remember what their real name is.
Right. No, I mean, having characters have first names and surnames and middle names and having to remember who's calling whom by what can be very complicated, but generally you don't want to spend too much time worrying about it. You just pick what sounds natural, and if people forget your character's last name, it's not such a big deal, unless it's really important. Then you can remind them.
Yeah, but this is just like, an all-purpose kind of idea for, basically just come up with a good system for naming things, and you don't have to be terribly strict about it unless it's important for the story that it's a strict naming convention.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to do is you can go the Tolkien route and you can create an entire language so that you have a set of phonemes that you can put together to make names.
Yes. You can also approach it from a completely psychopathic view. That is perfectly legitimate.
I think calling Tolkien a psychopath is probably a little overwrought, but...
A little, but... I mean, he did invent an entire language for a handful of books, I'm just saying. Was he a linguist? I don't know anything about Tolkien.
I think he was a linguist. He was
okay. So that,
English language history kind of thing. I'd have to look it up.
That does make a bit of sense.
It makes more sense, but it still is a little bit overkill.
Yeah, just a little.
Although you might want to play around with that, because I've had some success working on I'm working on some fantasy stuff. And I'm trying to come up with names that aren't necessarily just like words in English kind of thing. And what I found is helpful sometimes is to at least say, okay, this means this, and this means this, and therefore, I kind of create a little bit of a vocabulary, not a complete one, but I at least have some references so that I can see, so that I can at least pepper that in other names if I need to. That if a certain thing means feather, then I can put that into names of feathered characters, for instance.
I've always been a little bit more, well, so I actually have a character that's called a feather null.
Uh-huh.
And I'm usually a bit more upfront about those things if I really want to be, unless I'm being goofy about it. Like, I made this big to-do on a page in a story I wrote where everyone referred to a character as a Sablavanya, and I made it sound like this big impressive title, and it just ended up meaning supervillain.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I've never actually created an entire system for that kind of thing. I just have always preferred to wing it, which is why I suggested that you start talking about the naming thing, because you probably put more effort into it.
Well, I mean, in science fiction, it's not that hard, but you just don't want to name everybody. I don't know. It depends on what you're trying, how grounded you're trying to be. So.
Caramel ashtray? Yeah, probably not a good idea to...
I mean, it depends, right? But, I mean, in the future, no one may even know what an ashtray is, so...
That's part of the joke, actually, but I haven't finished that book yet.
Right. So, what else do you need to do to create background lore for to create a background for a story for a game or something like that? You need history. So you need to create things like timelines. You need to say that this happened and this happened and this happened, and because of this happened. I mean, I haven't done too much of that, but it's not particularly difficult. It's just, what's the word? Somewhat boring, I guess.
Well,
because
you're basically on how you do it.
Yeah, I guess so. But I mean, like, if you're going to try to create some kind of self-consistent timeline, you need to start thinking about connections between events and, you know, the motivations of the big movers in the world you're creating. So
it can be different than that. I mean, what you can do to create an entire background for everything, an entire lore for, you know, if you're building some kind of game world, you can write one story about a set of characters, even just a short story, and then take everything that happened in that story and start thinking about what kind of world these characters would have to exist in order for all of that to fit into a larger universe. Like take everything that one character did and say, well, why was this character like this throughout the story? You don't have to come up with all of that up front. You can write the story that you want to write first and then say, all right, how do I make a universe where this makes sense? And you take little pieces of everything you've done, and then you come up with, okay, this character did this. Was it because of something that happened in their personal life, or because of the society that they were in, or because of some traumatic event or something, or some fun event? And as you do each character, you'll start, as you're doing this, you're creating more endpoints where you can start to slowly connect all of them together. So, like, this happened to this character, this happened to this character, this happened to this character. Why did it happen to each one? You come up with 3 different reasons why it happened to each one, and then you look at those 3 reasons and say, okay, well, how can all 3 of these be connected so that they all fit into the same world? Like why is it possible that all 3 of these events can exist in the same world? And are there, like, direct connections between them? Are there, you know, connections that are, like, so distant that they're almost irrelevant to each other? I don't know. I mean, I could throw out examples from stuff I've done, but it would take a while to really, you know, circle in on the point if I tried to do that.
Yeah.
I guess the point is you can build a lore for an entire universe without having to go step by step. Okay, there is this faction X, and they are like this, and they have this powerful of a military, yada yada. You can really throw all of that stuff away until you've actually got everything written until you've come up with everything in a general sense of what kind of world you want to have.
I guess it depends a little bit on the level of realism you want to work with in your story. Because you got to be careful if you're dealing with a very, like, grounded story where strange things don't really happen, you need to be careful not to, you know, write yourself into a corner. But
yeah, the exercise there is to make sure that make sure that there's a good reason for everything that happens. Yeah. If you see something that you can't really explain in your universe, the trick there is to either, remove that if you don't want to deal with it,
Right.
which is always, that can be painstaking if you've worked on something for a while, but that's an option. Or you make it a big part of your universe is the explanation as to why that actually works.
Sure.
You've anytime you write yourself into a corner, it's a good opportunity to say, but is there anything that can be done to get me out of that corner? Like, is there any, and again,
while
especially
maintaining
if
the
you're,
events.
yeah, while maintaining a sense of, realism in that universe. Like
Yeah.
realism doesn't necessarily mean realism as we might see it in the real world. It means realism as the characters would see it in their world. And so if you put yourself in their place and the events just wouldn't make sense in their universe, that's when you either really need to get the creativity going and come up with a reason it can, or ditch the idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't say how useful just sitting and thinking about something and brainstorming is as I've started to write more. You come up with the idea for a simple plot in your head, but then you realize that there need to be more twists and turns. There needs to be more characters having, particular thoughts, and they would have anticipated this, so this doesn't work. I don't know. I mean, one of the things that I have found very useful, more than, like, to a degree where I feel like if I'm just sitting still and not doing anything, I feel like I'm wasting time, but in reality, I'm not. Do you ever get that feeling?
Well, I mean, I think you and I both write a little differently. Like, I'll just start with a blank piece of paper and I'll fill out the paper. I'll just write 5 pages and be like, okay, does this all work out? Then I'll go back and read it and be like, yeah, basically I look for the mistakes that make the story not make sense, and those are the things I weed out first, and then I worry about editing.
Uh-huh.
I think you take a more, planned approach to your writing. Like, everything seems to come off as making perfect sense in in terms of any world that you create. Especially you've got, the scientific approach to all of your sci-fi.
Yeah.
And since you know so much about that stuff, it really comes off as being fleshed out the way you write it.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know, like, I don't really have moments where I feel like I'm not getting anything done because I'm thinking about the stories, because a lot of times my best ideas come up, like I'm working on something and a month later is when the idea that makes it all fit together finally comes to mind. Sometimes it's just spontaneous like that. You've been thinking about it, and then like a week later, without thinking about it, it falls into place. But if you hadn't been thinking about it the weeks before, it never would have happened. That's the thing. That's the way I look at it.
No, I mean, it's I don't know. There's this feeling that if I'm not actually, like, if I don't have my hands on a piece of paper, if I don't have my hands on a keyboard, that I'm not doing any good. But like you said, having things roll around in your head, there's actually value to that, and more than I thought when I started out on this silly writing adventure that I've begun.
I mean, that's basically what I do almost every way. I wake up in the morning, and the first thing I do when I wake up is I'm like thinking about things I'm going to write. I'm in the shower, I'm thinking about what I want to happen in stories. I'm trying to come up with funny jokes for different characters to make, and deciding on how I want to tweak their personalities to flesh them out further. At work, that's pretty much all I'm doing. It's either thinking about things I'm studying or thinking about things I want to write. That's all that's going on up there. Or food. I mean, I think about food more than both of those, to be honest.
Well, I mean, I didn't have a job where I could sit around and kind of think about other things. I actually had my brain active in my previous job, and so there wasn't much. I got out of the habit, I guess is the way to put it. Maybe
there's a bonus to working at my level versus working at your level.
Yes. So what else do we want to talk about as far as this hypothetical grimdark or dark and also grim story that we're trying to create? I keep doing that.
Well, how complicated...
I mean, we're not trying to create the story necessarily, but we're just trying to give people ideas on how to make their own if they need to.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of So everyone's going to do it differently is the problem. And I think
Of
that
course.
on the grand scale of things, even though you and I definitely both take a different approach, our approaches are much closer to each other than a lot of other people who write things or create things might have. Because
Hmm.
I know a lot of people that, and we're talking like, there's a lot of successful people that use both the just, coming up with stuff on the spot method or uh or planning everything out method. I mean, there's two extremes. There's being completely spontaneous, and then there's planning every little detail out ahead of time.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of in between and a lot of crossover there. Because like, if you were to just observe the way that I do it, you would think that I'm just coming up with everything on the spot and writing it down. And a lot of it just kind of happens that way as you're writing.
Right.
Even if you try to plan everything out, I mean, you're going to come up with a good idea in the middle of writing something down and be like,
Sure.
I need to add that in. But in reality, I've probably thought about what I'm going to write for at least a day or two in advance before I actually sit down writing it. Like when I'm writing a current story, I'm usually already planning, what I'm going to do for the next one because I've already come up with something new.
Hmm.
And the people that plot everything out ahead of time usually have they have a good basis for creating something new because they already know exactly the mold they want to fit it into.
Yeah.
Uh, that's there's nothing illegitimate about either method. And as even though I prefer one over the other, I've used both. So anyone that wanted to build something like that would be able to do that using either method. But one of the things that you could consider is how complicated do you want to make the game? And, I think there's a lot of people that are daunted by, looking at, say, a D&D manual or something and saying, I want to create something like that. I don't know if I can come up with a system and work out all the numbers and all of this other stuff when, even as a kid, like me and my brother would take paper plates and draw little game boards on them, and then we would just come up with a quick rule for the dice that we would use like a 6-sided die and come up with 20 different ways to use it so that you could play the game.
Sure.
Different roles for different things, and what would the various 1 through 6 levels mean for all of these different things. And then you can just use the same die to do some kind of modifier to a roll so that you don't need a D20 or anything.
Right.
Especially for people that want to do this to make money, like, make a card deck that comes with two, with a pair of dice, and make a game out of that, just for practice. Like, if you want to build something that's even larger than that in the future, start with something small, and once you've built something small, you've always got something that you can build off of from there. So you can take that and say, all right, how do I expand this?
Yeah, that's another good point, because you can always start sparse on the story ideas, on the lore ideas, just like we did. We said, okay, we got 5 events of extinction. We would, if we wanted to build that into more story, we'd come up with names and shapes and kind of like a very overall kind of what kind of culture do each of these races have. Then we would start to fill in little details, over time, and you don't necessarily need to do it all at once. So
yeah, and if you wanted to make a game, like, okay, so here's one way that you could do it.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
You let's say you want to create in the end a large universe style game, like something that may or may not take place somewhere close to 39.
The thing that we're trying to deal with here is we're trying to deal with companies that make a bunch of lore that people fall in love with, right?
Right.
And then they start to act very proprietary about this lore, when in reality this lore was all created based on other things in pop culture that they kind of absorbed over time. And like there's people have an attachment to that lore, but I think what's important for people to realize is that they could create something like that themselves, if they wanted to, and therefore there shouldn't be this, what would you call it, like excessive desire to kind of prop up this old thing when
Yeah, you don't have to cater to the people that are like impeding the thing that you love. You can branch off and create your own. Like anyone that has played any kind of large scale tabletop role playing game and has any experience at it at all could easily just like sit down for a day or two and create their own thing and have their friends come over and try it out. It's maybe even spend a week or two working on something. You don't even really have to create any full-fledged campaign right away. Just like start small, build your way up from there, and borrow from things that I don't think people understand just how loose copyright law can be. You can borrow from a lot of things without actually even landing on someone's radar.
Yeah.
And especially if you're if you're in the design stage and you're just testing things out, you can directly steal before you put anything out there, and then just modify it right before you just decide to print something and put it up for sale. Like just outright use like a special species from a game you like, and then just say, okay, now I actually want to release this. How do I change them, and what do I change them to, so I'm not infringing on someone's trademark or copyright?
Right.
And that might sound like something that you don't want to do, but that is actually how almost all creative works work. You're always in some way borrowing from something that you have experienced.
Yeah. All right. Well, do we want to say anything else about this, or do we want to move into the next section?
Well, I just want to say that the idea that there are these great tabletop games out there, that the companies who produce these for the entertainment value for people to play, when it gets to the point that, because what it's all about is money in the end. It's like people have been playing these games in comic book shops for years. Sure. And the companies, eventually they got in on that because they saw an opportunity to market to people. And then they wanted to try and take control of the actual, games or tournaments or workshops so that they could, find more ways to profit off of them, which if they ever did, I'm not really sure. Like, the books are there for sale. Having your stand in front of people who are playing the game where they can purchase more stuff, that's one thing, that's fine. But, trying to actually control what they're doing on the table, as far as the people who make these games should be concerned, whatever's happening on those tables, they could be a complete rewrite of their rules, as far as they're concerned. Let the players have their fun. And if you don't, I think more people should just, hey, we'll just make our own thing, and you'll always be able to find comic shops that are going to want to get a bunch of nerds playing games at their tables so that they can get them in there to shop.
That's a good point.
Yeah, people do not have to stick to these major franchises that get greedy to the point that it actually hurts their business.
Or should hurt their business, but hurting their business is difficult.
Well, it always does eventually, because you don't attract new people when people get the impression that they can't actually go to these things. And you'll get the people that have been in it for a long time that get really uptight about, well, no, we are going to follow all the rules, and this is the official sanction thing and everything. And then to people that are new that try to get in on things like that, it's a big turnoff to most of them. It's like,
yeah.
A lot of times it's just people that want something to do while they're talking to their friends, and if you change that, then you've taken a lot of their reason for being there away from it.
Yeah.
It's like if the NFL wanted to come in and tell people what kind of Doritos they're allowed to eat while watching the game with their friends. It's just not... It's not the way you do things.
No, that's a very good point. So, I guess we can move on. The other thing that we were going to talk about this first episode, so I guess we're going to do reviews from time to time, and we're either going to do them in one of two formats, either something that we've both read or something that one of us has read. And this is something that we kind of pioneered on your YouTube channel back in the day, where you would have watched some awful DC or Marvel movie and then explain to me what's going on as I sit there in disbelief at the crazy things the characters are doing.
Yeah, it would usually be a movie I saw and you didn't, and so...
Right, but sometimes vice versa, but...
Yeah, we were going into it half blind, as you said.
Yes, I am more attached to that moniker than I think anyone else is. So,
What, the half blind reviews?
yeah.
I have no problem calling them that if you want to call them that.
Well, I seem to like calling them that more than anybody else does.
Well, it's strange because when you actually said that, I thought that you were referencing something that was actually called half-blind reviews that I just wasn't aware of, kind of like how I would throw out the term mystery science theatering something when I'm making fun of something.
Sure. No, okay. Well,
but yeah, we can use half-blind review. I'm good with it. Are we doing a half-blind review?
I think we are. You haven't read this book, and I have. Is that right?
What was the book again?
The question is what book. The book is The Last Theorem by Arthur C. Clarke and Frederik Pohl.
I have not read this book.
Okay. So I read this in the last couple of weeks, and I really liked the earlier Arthur Clarke that I had read because, he was very clear about what was happening. He explained complicated scientific things with, a decent amount of clarity. He had stories that were interesting not because the characters were all basket cases, but because something interesting was happening and the characters were reacting to the interesting circumstances that they were thrown into. I thought that Clarke was always very well written and very careful about what he had written, because he wrote these long, 4-book sagas. A Space Odyssey is, I think, 4 books. Rama has 4 books in it. And then he's written a bunch of other stuff. And, I've never read any Frederik Pohl, but I looked him up on, Wikipedia, and I've heard, and, he seems like he's a very well-known and, prolific author in the science fiction genre. And so, when I picked this book up, I was like, cool, first author, Arthur C. Clarke, second author, Frederik Pohl, both kind of giants in the field, and I thought this was going to be a great book. And it was less great than I thought it was going to be.
Okay, so I feel like maybe we don't have to give your whole background here just as reference, but I think it's important in this instance to note that you are a scientist.
Yes.
And so it kind of makes these things even funnier from that perspective. I dabble in reading about science. I'm not even going to be humble about it. I definitely know a lot more than most people about the subject. But I am nowhere near as educated on the subject as you. So it's really fun when you bring things like these to my attention, because sometimes I'm not even aware of whether they're right or wrong.
Yeah. So, let me say this. So let me say this. The Last Theorem is one of the sloppiest books I've read in a long time, as far as science fiction goes. It's sloppier than... It's sloppy because it's trying to be realistic, and it's not... And when something obvious flies in the face of that realism, it's very jarring. And so, while, the pop science fiction that I read sometimes, whatever that might be, Mech Warrior maybe, or something like that, is all very, I'm sure it's also very sloppy, but it's kind of sloppy everywhere, as opposed to being grounded in a bunch of places and then suddenly going off into left field, and then coming back and being like, no, this is a grounded science fiction story. So, I kept noticing these things one by one, and the sloppiness is not the worst of it. It's because I'll get to this in a minute, but if you're writing science fiction and you know about science, your position toward the reader should be one of humility, not I'm better than you. And that was another problem that this book had. So the one thing that really got me the first time I read it was that, okay, so I'm gonna try to start with a non-spoiler version of kind of what's going on here. But basically, it's a book about an alien invasion on Earth, and the main character is a guy who really loves number theory, and that's and Frederik Pohl in his little introduction that he wrote talks about how he loves number theory, and then, for instance, there's there's a point where they talk about something that they call tetrominoes. It's basically how can you arrange four squares connected to each other so that they are unique under reflection or rotation. And it's funny because anyone who has played Tetris knows what the tetrominoes are. You have the four in a line, you have the L shape, and the two L shapes in Tetris are reflections of each other, and so they count as one in the world of free tetrominoes. You have the T shape, you have the 2x2 square, and you have the S shape, where it's two and then a jog and then two more, right?
Right.
So, in this book, when they talk about free tetrominoes, they miss the S-shaped one. And it's it's not like they mention it in passing. This is an important part of, one of the characters' developments. One of the kind of sub-characters. But one of the sub-characters' developments, it's very important that we know that he understands these tetrominoes, the pentominoes, the hexominoes, because the authors are trying to get across to us that this person is like an idiot savant kind of character, and so then they immediately say, here are the free tetrominoes, and they list them, and the S-shaped one is missing, and I actually had to get up and leave my chair and walk over to my computer and go on Wikipedia and make sure that I wasn't crazy, because I was like, well, maybe it's not. Maybe for some strange reason this doesn't count. But no, I looked it up, and the free tetrominoes, there's one more than they say there are in the book, and I find that to be incredibly careless for a book where number theory is the thing. Like the whole idea is about this main character. One of the things that the main character does is he solves Fermat's Last Theorem, and that's very important. That's a very important part of the story. It's very integral to the plot, and the whole book is about number theory and about doing parlor tricks with number theory, which I won't spoil. But the author, Frederik Pohl, is like, I came up with a bunch of cute little tricks that you can do that are related to number theory. And also, I don't know how many free tetrominoes there are, and I put it in a book. So that was just kind of that was the point where I was like, wait a minute. Because I had been feeling this over and over again as I had gone through, and so now I became very attuned to it. And so, there's one point in the book where this main character, after he's solved Fermat's Last Theorem, he gets a job, as a science person, doing science things. And he's like, this is so cool, I have access to all these journals, because, Arthur C. Clarke had a giant hard-on about Sri Lanka, for whatever reason. I guess he had some kind of spiritual experience there, but whatever. So the main character is a Sri Lankan guy who kind of comes up from poverty and becomes this famous number theorist. And it's very important that he's come up from having no access to any of this knowledge, and suddenly someone has plopped him in a chair and said, here is all of the knowledge that we have in the human race about number theory. Go to work. And he's like, I don't know what to do. And it seems, as a scientist, it's very disturbing to me to see a person who loves knowledge for the sake of knowledge being given an opportunity to expand knowledge and being like, I'm bored. And it seems like the authors just kind of didn't have an idea of what to do. And this happens a couple times in the book where the author's like, well, this would be boring, or I don't know what to do here, so we'll just do nothing. Question mark. Let's see. That was another point where I had to stop reading because I was like, they just handed you a gold key to the world's knowledge, and you're like, I'm bored. It's like the person who solved Fermat's Last Theorem under the conditions that he solved it would not, I imagine, have this reaction to being given everything that he had complained that he hadn't had for the last 100 pages of the book. Because it's not like he just learned that these journals exist. He spent a good chunk of the early part of the book and a couple of plot points trying to get access to these journals, and succeeding and then failing and then succeeding and then failing kind of thing.
Is that the idiot
now,
part of the idiot
no,
savant?
No,
because
I'm
picturing
the idiot
like
savant's a different character. That's a side character.
Oh, okay.
The main character is not an idiot savant.
So the main character is just like a child that like begs for a toy over and over again, gets it and plays for it with one day, and then forgets it exists.
Something like that. Yes, it's very jarring. It's very weird. It's a very strange way to write something, and it feels like the authors were like, I ran out of ideas. And then they like throw their keys at you. It was very, very like that, because then he basically says, "Oh, I found some prime numbers, or I tried to find some prime numbers." And it's like, really? That was the best you could come up with? So like there was that, and that seemed careless and sloppy to me. There's a point where they have their Mr. Fusion point, where they're like,
just to back up.
Sure.
Just to point out just how sloppy this actually is. It's like the idea that there's this thing that someone is trying to attain in a story, and when they finally get their hands on it, something should be revealed from that fact for the sake of the story. I mean, if not for the sake of the character in the story, then for the sake of the reader. And you're supposed to
miss out on that opportunity is a big no-no.
Yeah, you need to reward readers to keep their interest. It's just,
but you also need to show that when you reward a character, that character does something with the reward. That's a primary thing. A primary thing that main characters should do is they should, take action when they're given what they complained of was preventing them from taking action.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing though. It's like, here's the knowledge. There's something here that we can glean from this that can be used as to drive the plot forward.
Yeah.
And then the person's just like, I'm bored.
Yes, that's basically what happened in the book.
Because if you do that, then your reader is bored too.
Either bored or confused.
Yeah.
I was a little bit of both. Let's see. What's another fun thing? Another fun mistake that they made. And there's a hand wave in here, but the hand wave doesn't make sense. So, chemical bonds. Chemical bonds are a way to store energy, right? That's why oil holds energy that we can release by burning it and replacing those chemical bonds with lower energy chemical bonds, right? We convert these long carbon chains into carbon dioxide and hydrogen and water, and we end up with a bunch of extra spare energy that we can get. And so this is like really, like, I don't know, for some reason this really bugged me. But like, I mean, we've all seen Back to the Future and how they have that Mr. Fusion machine where you just like dump garbage in the back of the car and it turns it into energy.
Yeah.
And you can do that because fusion is kind of like, well, yeah, fusion is just how you get energy out of matter, because you're basically destroying matter as you take small atoms and clump them into larger atoms. And okay, there's enough gray area there that it kind of at least makes sense in the world of Back to the Future. But in this, they came up with the idea of making a car that you can fuel with water. And the way that they did this is that boron, the chemical, the element, is very good at pulling, chemical bonds apart. And that would be great if there was a way to, if those chemical bonds, the fact that those chemical bonds are desirable or like the reason that they happen quickly and rapidly and violently when you say mix boron with water is that the bonds that are being created have a bunch of energy. And so basically they show a car where you just dump water into the gas tank, the quote-unquote gas tank, and then somehow magically boron separates it into hydrogen, and then you burn the hydrogen to create more steam, and somehow that makes the car go. And they hand wave that somebody figured out how to get the boron to release its bonds with other things, not realizing that this car still violates conservation of energy. And conservation of energy is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it might have some relevance to making any sort of scientific feat, work.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't claim that they had broken conservation of energy. They just claimed that you put water into the car and the water comes back out in the form of steam, which is more energy, and the movement of the car, which is more energy. It was very bizarre because I felt like if Arthur C. Clarke had actually looked at this, he would have been like, that doesn't make sense, but apparently not. I can only.
Did it start to feel like a Frederik Pohl story featuring Arthur C. Clarke?
Well, that was the thing. Okay, so
because I read Clarke too, and you're right. He never comes off as the kind who would just hand wave that sort of thing.
No, and so yeah, I started to feel like, and I feel like this is not because they were both really freaking old when they wrote this book. Like Clarke died a couple years after the book came out, and Pohl died a couple extra years after that.
Do we know for sure that Clarke wasn't already dead?
I assume not. I assume he was alive. But
because I'm pretty sure I tried this exact same experiment, except I used borax instead, and I feel like I got slightly better results.
Yeah. Well, no, it's just very. It's because okay. So the one thing about Arthur C. Clarke's writing is that he was never self-congratulatory, and I started seeing these parts of the book that were very self-congratulatory, like to the point where if I had been reading the book aloud to an audience of adults, I would have put my hand out and made a shaking motion.
Well, did the dedication read "Attaboy"?
Maybe. Well, I mean, he can't attaboy himself. What it was there were lots of places where it seemed like the author was, whoever was writing that part of the book, just was like, look at how smart I am, look at how smart I am, look at how smart I am, and it came through in a very way. Let's see. Oh, okay, so another thing that was very sloppy in the book. They go on in the first chunk of the book talking about ion drives. And ion drives are a real thing. You accelerate some heavy fluid to very close to the speed of light, and you use that as a thruster, right? You don't get a lot of thrust because you're only using the very tiniest amount of this heavy element as possible. But you get a little bit of thrust, and so you can basically run these things on and on and on and on and on because they consume so little material to run, and they give you so much velocity per material that they're quite efficient as far as that goes. But basically the idea is that you need to run these things for a very long time until your craft is approaching the speed of light. And then you get diminishing returns at that point. But so be it, right? And then they had a fleet of alien ships using ion drives fly toward Earth and get almost to the speed of light. They do say that they almost reached the speed of light, and therefore the drives were not of any use anymore. And then they drop all of their momentum in 1 day or 2 days in the story when it becomes important for them to drop their momentum quickly. And it was very strange to see this momentum conservation failure in a story, because conservation of momentum is another big one in science. Like if you're not conserving momentum, you better explain why. And these were pretty clearly not. It may be that they were using rockets suddenly, but then but you would need to expend all that rocket fuel.
It wouldn't have made sense for the ion drive at that point.
Yeah, if you have the rockets to do it, then you. I mean,
come up with something. At the very least, I would have made up some jargon about how space was somehow thicker closer to Earth. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But
I would have gone with some kind of ether theory about being within the sun's solar grasp. I don't know.
Well, because I kept expecting them to be like, yeah, and then they had to turn around and they had to run their ion drives for 6 weeks in order to get back down to, classical velocities. And then it didn't happen, and I'm like, well, they're going to explain it. And then I finished the book, and they didn't explain it. And I was like, okay, well, that sucks.
It's like the aliens have they've got Flintstone spaceships where they stick their feet out the bottom and it just starts slowing them down.
Yeah, it was kind of like that. And then there was a point where people on Earth mistook the alien fleet slowing down for a supernova, despite the fact that people know already what supernova time profiles are like. And this wouldn't have looked like a supernova, I'm pretty sure. So I don't know. I mean, it's very. that part wasn't so egregious, but it was still like, nobody would have thought that. Why would anybody have thought that for a minute?
Yeah, like, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what that would entail. You're going to have to help me out here, but what would they be looking at to make them think that it was a supernova? Would they be looking at that on some kind of spectrum?
They were looking at a big light in the sky from a bunch of ion drives firing. But
it was decelerating, so...
Well, I mean, sure.
Does at any point a supernova look like a decelerating light?
No.
Okay, that's the issue I was having.
So, like, a supernova... First off, you would judge the distance of a supernova, roughly, by either a parallax measurement of the star system before the supernova, which is perfectly reasonable. You take a measurement in the summer, you take a measurement in the winter, and then you have this big giant triangle of the Earth's entire orbit to determine what the angle of difference is there. And you can measure those angles pretty precisely, to within a couple of light years, for very far distant objects. But then you would also have like the spectrum of the helium absorption line, and you can use the detuning of that line to get a good estimate for the distance because of what we've observed that appears to be the accelerating expansion of the universe. That objects that are further away are moving away faster on average than they really ought to be. And so you can use that shift in the spectrum of hydrogen to figure out roughly how far away something is based on that expansion rate. So you would see that, and you would see that an ion drive where you were using, say, liquid xenon as your propellant, you would see xenon emission lines. You would see those lines moving over time as the spaceship slowed down, because the relative velocity of the xenon being ejected to slow them down would be changing compared, as opposed to what you were looking at. So you would see a specific set of lines from a specific element, probably, and then you would see that line moving over time. Whereas, a supernova, you would see the lines where they are, and they would stay there. And then you would see lines from, say, the creation of higher atomic number elements appearing, or you might see, you would see maybe a black body radiation spectrum of rapidly increasing temperature. Things like that. You would definitely be able to tell the difference between a supernova and a bunch of decelerating starships using a xenon ion drive.
So basically, we have the equivalent of like a Lowe's hardware manager in the scientific world failing upward into his job, who just walked into a room one day and was like, "Hey guys, just want to let you know, heads up, we've got a xenon supernova in the sky," and then he just walks away and everyone just looks around like, "Xenon? What?"
Well, I mean, it's conceivable that somehow in the fictional world of this book that every single person with a telescope and a spectrometer didn't know what they were talking about, but the odds are low.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just very sloppily written. It was written in such a way that the author seemed to be self-congratulating himself for his intelligence more often than the sloppiness of the book justified. And, I mean...
It's just really weird, though, that, like, because, I mean, I'm assuming that Frederik Pohl actually knows some of this stuff. And...
So Frederik Pohl, from what I read, he is a high school dropout, but, I'm sure that he did a lot of reading over, he lived to be 90 or something like that, so I'm sure that over the course of a very successful science fiction career, that he learned some science, whether he did it, by himself or, just like learning from books or whatever. But
we can say he learned maybe, let's say roughly 83% of everything he needed to know. Like, you can drop a shape here or there, that's fine.
I think the dropping of a shape is fairly inexcusable considering that he claimed to love number theory. But, like, I would have expected Clarke to have been like, no, dude, it's chill, There was that, And then I guess we'll get into some light spoilers. I don't want to necessarily spoil the whole book, but like it is about a number theorist and his reaction and his family's reaction to an alien invasion. But like, before we get into spoilers, actually, one more little thing. So, I don't expect science fiction authors to necessarily know a lot of economics, but it was very strange to me to learn that a technologically advanced alien race didn't understand the concept of money.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
So like that was just very strange. They're like, what is money? And then I guess they went on Wikipedia and they're like, we'll give you gold and just give us time to make some gold. And it was like, oh, okay, that plot thread died, but it's kind of sort of, but not really. Yeah, it's very strange. Because if you know any economics, you know that part of what's necessary to build up a technologically advanced system of structure of capital is to have exchange, and one of the things that and have the ability to plan, and money prices are an important part of that.
Well, if I may, you need to be able to speedily exchange as you have a larger capacity for production. You need to be able to more speedily exchange to be able to know where production needs to be able to move. And
yes.
Money is the most efficient means of speedily exchanging.
Money prices specifically.
Yeah, money. Yeah.
Well, because otherwise you don't know whether you're wasting resources or not. So that was another funny one that I kind of chalked up to the fact that Frederik Pohl had joined the Young Communists in the 30s, which I guess was fashionable back then because it was either be a communist or be a fascist, and I guess Pohl picked the communists because there's no other way where you don't screw over everybody else like communism.
That's
and
also
fascism
sloppy too, though.
Of course it is, but neither of them are economists, and so this is one of those things that science fiction authors like to do is they like to paint their ideals onto alien races.
That's what I'm saying. Is like there are situations where people will write a story,
sure,
and they'll try to create like some different system of doing things that is it's foreign to humanity. The idea is like, oh well, they're a completely different race. They evolved and did things differently, and so they have this different society, sure. Which is totally cool. I mean that makes for some really cool science fiction stories sometimes. But to just say, oh, we don't have money, and then not why even bring that up if you're not going to say here's how they do their thing? Yeah,
it was very
because
it was
clearly
kind of sloppy.
Yeah, clearly they have all this stuff.
And there wasn't like a notion that this race was like a communist race, or that they had achieved a hive mind or something like that. They were literally individuals that were stuck permanently in high tech armored suits, and for some reason they don't know what exchange and value are. And I was just like, okay. Let's see. Okay, light spoiler. Let me ask you a question. You have a character. You have a character. That character needs to figure out a solution to Fermat's Last Theorem. And we need that to be not boring. How do you make discovering an answer and a solution to Fermat's Last Theorem not boring?
Well, I don't know what it is, but I would say that
it's a mathematical theorem. To put the details aside, basically, you know how you have the Pythagorean theorem?
Yeah.
And you know how 3 squared plus 4 squared is 5 squared, right?
Yeah.
So Fermat's Last Theorem is that only ever works for squared.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that cubed. The one where a cube? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that's Fermat's Last Theorem, and we need someone to come up with a proof of Fermat's Last Theorem, and we need to make it exciting. How do you do that as a science fiction author?
Well, I mean, one way I would do it is I would probably have the person consult with another person that's working on a problem that might be affected by the solution, and so
yes, that's a great idea. Yeah, absolutely. That
person goes off, and by every time they meet, one of them is bringing something more to the table, and then finally, probably through some completely unrelated situation, the person that they were consulting for help would come back and be like, "Hey, I found this," and it would just be something that would be vague enough to where I don't actually have to solve a theorem that I can't solve, but
Sure.
would have enough behind it to where it's like, okay, this character was working on something that similarly implied that there's a solution to this problem. They come back, they sit down there, they have a moment of awe where they're like, this actually is
This might be the step, yeah.
This is the step. And maybe give a little scene where they're, they spend an entire, weekend staying up all night and looking over papers and crunching numbers and, discussing different things, just a kind of vague scene to make it interesting.
You have them going through the proof and they find a mistake and they're like,
yeah,
no, we have to work this out. Yeah, these are all great ideas. Do you have anything else that you want to throw at this?
I know, because I have a feeling that you're about to make me laugh.
Oh,
so
yeah, because you're totally wrong. That's not how you do it.
All right, how do you do it?
You have him be captured by pirates, and then he figures it all out in his head while he's being tortured.
I mean, that's funny, but it's not a solution.
That's how they solved it in this book.
No, what would have been good? What would have been a good idea is captured by pirates and tortured, but one of the pirates actually works something out with him, and by accident, the pirate gives him the solution.
Oh no, the pirates all have no character, and actually, he doesn't stay with the pirates. No, what happens is he gets captured by pirates, and then the pirates get captured by governments, and then he gets sent to an extraordinary rendition camp, and he gets tortured by people who are being told to torture him on the down low by the U.S. government.
That sounds more realistic, actually.
Well, it's more realistic, but then at the same time, he thinks up this whole 5-page proof in his head and keeps it there during the torture. And then when he gets out, he looks for a computer and writes a 5-page paper that he sends to Nature.
And you said you're a what now? I'm a statistician. Oh, so you look at probabilities and averages. No, statistician. I have people torture me until I come up with mathematical solutions.
Basically. It was very strange. I mean, the whole...
I got my terminology wrong. That would be a masochistician.
Masochistician, yeah. But the statistician sounds right.
Better, yeah.
Yeah, it makes more sense and it makes the joke work. So we'll go with that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because they foreshadowed clumsily the pirate thing, and then it happens also suddenly, and you're like, oh wow, this was going to be some really cool adventure, and then there's no cool adventure. He literally just gets tortured and comes up with a solution to Fermat's Last Theorem and holds it all in his brain until he stops being tortured.
Ah, the cubes, they all make sense now.
Well, they yeah, something like that. And, it was just it seemed like, I mean, there are cases where you have someone who's in a situation like that, and they retreat into their own mind,
Yeah.
But there wasn't any sense of that. There wasn't any sense of like he had learned to cope with what he was dealing with physically by detaching himself mentally, because right after he gets out of the extraordinary rendition place, he's just back to normal. Everything's normal. He has a slight bit of medical issues, he has to get his one of his front teeth replaced, but then he's just fine. And
see, I mean, good. It could have worked too. Like if it had been a case of maybe they were giving him some electroshock kind of torture, or if he had taken several blows to the head and had a ringing in his ears, but for some reason the ringing was making the numbers work out in his head. Just any explanation at all would help.
Well, I mean, yes and no. One of the goals of torture is to mess up what's in your subject's head, right? To make them feel like they're all they don't know whether they're really alive or dead. There's all kinds of, you want to mess with their mind, and if you fail to mess with their mind, then if they can remember a 5-page mathematical proof while you're torturing them, you're a very bad torturer.
It's like, we have the technology, we can make him stronger, smarter, faster, and then they just blackjack him.
Yeah, but then at the same time, his recovery is so bizarrely, inhumanly, fast and complete. He's just yeah, I'm fine. I'm famous now. It's just okay. This was a very strange part of the story, but I guess he needed to have that solution in his back pocket so that he becomes world famous, so the rest of the plot comes into place. Yeah, because that's what we need in the book.
He's like the Wolverine of mathematicians.
Yeah, and then Yeah, there's just a lot of carelessness and a lot of very strange like plot twists that aren't really plot twists. Like there's this whole like secret world government thing that simultaneously doesn't make sense and also doesn't really go anywhere. Like you think that the secret world government has something to do with the aliens and it just doesn't. And you're like, wait, what?
Are you sure J.J. Abrams didn't write this?
It didn't have enough explosions.
Oh, okay.
But like it was I mean,
because this is sounding a lot like Lost, where it's just like, here's 5 interesting things. We will never resolve any of these 5 interesting things.
Look at these 5 mystery boxes. They are mystery boxes. Okay,
forever.
What are the answers to the mystery boxes? Hello? Yeah, it was kind of like that. There was like a roundabout way that this secret government thing like was good, but then was also bad, but then was also good, but then was also bad, and it's just like, it's one of those things where there wasn't a whole lot of like actual thought behind it. There was more like a very glib political
bipolar secret government agency.
Well, like so get this. They are dedicated to transparency. That is their guiding principle.
The secret government organization.
Yeah, you got it in one. the secret government organization that possesses a secret weapon that can destroy all technology in a limited area at will, without killing any people, or without killing any people who aren't on pacemakers.
Okay, that kind of weapon can't exist for one reason and one reason alone. Who walks into a room and proposes, I have a weapon that can stop all technology, and doesn't get laughed out of the room?
Well,
what does that even mean? You can stop all technology.
It's the EMP thing, right? Where people think like, oh, EMP, that just does everything, and it's like, well, no, EMP will mess up certain things.
Faraday disagrees.
There's that, but then there's also things like there are plenty of objects that are simply, or plenty of circuits that have a resistive place. Some kind of significant resistance in the circuit. And if that resistor is actually an object that has a little bit of mass to it and isn't just like the gate of a transistor, then generally those things will survive EMPs because there's a resistor that can dissipate the tiny amount of heat that it picks up from the EMP burst. So like when EMP tests were done over like Hawaii or something like that in the past, and they had like, if I remember the numbers correctly, the things that they published said that like 30% of instrumentation was messed up by the EMP in a permanent way.
People were out there recording it with their cell phones. It was fine.
But it was very funny for like there to be this secret government organization that uses a secret weapon to basically knock out all technology in places where people are having wars, and it's like and have their organizing principle be transparency for thee but not for me. And have anyone and for anyone to even like go along with that for a second. Like that was very unrealistic and strange and kind of funny. And then like they were good guys, but then they were kind of bad guys, but then they didn't realize it, but they were good guys because like it ended up being a thing where basically the US government was taking over the world, and but at the same time, because they were getting rid of war in a systematic way, that's what caused the aliens to not want to kill humanity.
Okay, so, that's the most unbelievable thing to me in that whole story.
Yeah, it was a weird combination of pessimistic and idealistic that didn't make any real sense.
I'm just picturing the modern alien showing up to Earth and looking around and being like, America has spread so much peace, we will leave you alone, and then they just take off.
I mean, so that's exactly what happened, except it's worse than that. Because the aliens that were actually traveling to Earth were just basically like galactic hitmen, and then there was this is the one. So these galactic hitmen are working under the orders of another alien race, and this alien race is claimed to be like it's like ethereal and like it spans the whole galaxy, and they have their own reasons for increasing the average number of protons in an atom in the galaxy, and the writers are like, the reasons that they want to do this are not are not intelligible to human minds. And it's like, well, maybe they
That's one way to deal with it.
Maybe they want to make fission fuel or something. But anyway, so there's this great part, excellent part.
It's just OCD.
Well, probably because they can because they actually are like a hive mind, but they're like a hive mind that can split off bits, and the bits can go look at like a particular part of. But they also don't have to worry about relativity because they figured out a loophole in relativity, so they can move information faster than light. But they keep that information a secret, so that none of the other races know how to move anything faster than light, which is fine. But then, they go to the trouble of saying, there is one tiny fragment of this grand galactic race that we're going to look at as a character, and we're going to call him Bill, and Bill was in quotes. And they say, not Bill, no quotes, but Bill, in quotes. And I'm like, okay, they're going to call him Bill in quotes because they want to, because they're trying to say that this is really imposing weirdness on him from his perspective, is to give him his name that we can comprehend. And so we're going to keep his name in quotes, never use it, right? His name's in quotes. It's not in quotes. It's in quotes.
Okay.
3 pages later, maybe a little more than 3 pages later, they just start calling him Bill with no quotes. And I can't help but wonder whether someone had a stroke, or maybe an editor got on it and was like, "Oh, this shouldn't be in quotes because it's just a name." And it's like you can't take a page telling me that you're gonna put quotes, that you're gonna conspicuously put quotes around a character's name to emphasize the fact that you're making that you're playing fast and loose with the concept of individuality to begin with, and then you screw it up 3 pages later and just drop the quotes. You can't do that. You can't do that in a science fiction story. That was another painful moment where I was like, I read that and I'm like, oh, this is cool. They're gonna do this little quotes thing for whenever they talk about different characters that are among this galactic race. And number one, only this one part of the galactic race ever got mentioned as a character. So at number 2, they forgot about the quote marks, the conspicuous quote marks, 10 pages later, or 5 pages later, or 20 pages later. And it was but you said you weren't going to do this, and then you just did this. And why would you be sloppy like that? Don't be sloppy. Don't be sloppy. If you're going to spend a page telling me that you're going to use quote marks, use quote marks. Why would you not do that?
I think Arthur C. Clarke walked in and just was like, I'm not feeling this whole Bill thing. Let's just remove that. And Pohl was just like, you know what? I'll just drop the quotes. That'll be fine. And
but
then that was
you think
it.
They didn't read their story after they wrote it? Was this a first draft?
It sounds like it.
Made it into a hardcover worldwide release?
It sounds like they didn't read it after it was released. Or after they finished. It sounds like it went straight to an editor who was like, I don't know what this thing is. Why did they stop using these? You know what? It's got Arthur C. Clarke's and Frederik Pohl's name on it. Just put it out.
It's probably fine. They must have done this intentionally. Yeah, I don't know. It was.
And somewhere there's an editor that's hanging from a noose, swinging back and forth.
It was not a great experience for reading.
I have to admit, I mean,
yeah.
Maybe it has as much impact because you're a scientist, but to me, funny as all this is, I don't think it was as terrible a reading experience as the 3-body problem.
Probably not.
But oh my god, it has to be how big is the book?
300 pages.
Okay, so it's about the same size. So yeah. I guess maybe it kind of sounds like a lot of it was a slog.
I wouldn't say there was any part of it that was a slog necessarily. It was just that there were plenty of places where I was confused as to why the characters were reacting the way they did, or confused as to why this scientific thing that they mentioned got waved away a minute later.
Because I'd have been pretty angry about the whole here's the keys to the kingdom thing, and then it's just I'm bored.
No, I had to stop reading for the day at that point. I was like, I have to stop. I have to go do something else because I can't read any more of this today because they literally if you're plotting out a character like that, character has goal. Character has means that he needs for that goal, and he does not have the means. character then achieves those means, character then discovers he's unhappy because question mark is a very strange story arc for a character. I mean, especially when, I mean, it would have been one thing if they had focused on that, but it was like a 2-page addendum to like a chapter in the middle where he's like, yeah, I'm unhappy because they're not telling me what I need to do and I'm not sure what to research. And I just got all these journal accesses that I've been looking for, and so what I did was I came up with a couple of large prime numbers for them to play around with, and that's what I did. And it's like, and then like he gets out of the job, and now he's like trying to like do fun stuff again, but he very
like hang
easily,
out with pirates.
Like, well, no, like he becomes a professor, and so he's like trying to figure out what to teach people and stuff like that, and like that all goes fairly well. Like he has one good semester, and then he has one bad semester. And then he comes up with a way to make his good semester, his third semester, a good semester again. And it's like, cool. That's the way that a scientist or something, or an intelligent person would deal with a problem like, I'm not exactly sure what I should be doing. You experiment. You do one thing, and you see that it works. You do another thing, you see it doesn't work. You analyze why it doesn't work. You come up with a new idea. Maybe someone helps you come up with an idea for a third thing, and then the third thing maybe works. Or maybe it doesn't. You go back to the drawing board. But anyway, what the solution to being given everything you've been claiming for the last 100 pages that you wanted is not to say, I'm bored. Because no one's telling me what to do. I mean, especially when you just solved Fermat's Last Theorem.
Especially when you're a scientist. Like, I mean, I have dabbled. I'm not a scientist myself, but like one of the draws of looking at anything scientific is just like, it's very individualistic and very like, self-starting.
Yeah.
What kind of scientist needs to be told to do what to do every, step of the way? Especially in such a big moment of breakthrough where, you get access to something like that.
Yeah, it was very, like I will sit down and I will read things and I will not pay that much attention sometimes. But, like, this was like, even if I hadn't been paying attention, it would have been like, this doesn't make any sense. It was bad. That there were parts of this book that were really bad in that way. That either they were incredibly careless, they were incredibly self-congratulatory, or they were just ignorant of other things. And so, or they came up with bizarre solutions to problems of making something interesting, like let's have him be captured by pirates. So. Definitely not an excellent book, I would say. I definitely, if I go back with Arthur C. Clarke, I will probably be looking at his earlier books. Go ahead.
No. Are we absolutely sure J.J. Abrams didn't write this? Because I know you said that there weren't enough explosions, but sudden pirates is kind of the equivalent of explosions in this sense. Now that I think about it, it's like,
you're not entirely wrong.
We need to make this more interesting. Pirates.
He is captured by pirates, and then he comes up with a mathematical proof while being tortured. Yeah, I guess that part is Abrams-esque, but it is not particularly a large part of the book. It's actually kind of swept under the rug, honestly, because like he's captured by pirates, and then 6 months pass, with the not 6 months, but like a significant period of time passes where there's actually some interesting things that could have happened, right? Where like the pirates are saying, oh, you know English. You can speak with the passengers on this cruise ship, and you can help us figure out, whether there's someone who will pay a ransom for them or things like that. And like they could have played around with that. They played around with it ever so slightly, but didn't really do anything interesting with it. Basically, he gets what's the word? Like falsely identified as one of the pirates because of it. And then that's why they start torturing him.
Yeah, it doesn't even sound like there's...
He's wearing clothes with a monogram on them that aren't his monogram.
It doesn't sound like there's much of a reason for it to have happened other than for him to accidentally find a solution while being tortured.
Well, he didn't find the solution while being tortured. He had to keep the solution in his head while he was being tortured. I mean, the torture didn't help, but like, it's a very strange chunk of the story. And it just comes, I mean, like, it does get slightly foreshadowed, very slightly. But then, the pirates thing just comes out of nowhere. And then the extraordinary rendition thing comes even further out of nowhere because, like, so the scene is this. helicopters come with, I kid you not, brown noise transmitters that make you sick. And then, after he is sick, one of the things he was carrying was a suitcase. And so he pulls the clothes out of the suitcase after he cleans himself up and wears the clothes that were in the suitcase. And they find him, and he's cleaned up, but they assume that the clothes are his. There's a lot of weirdness in the story like that, where like they were just sloppy about details.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that, I'm much more picky about problems like that in my stories than I would have been when I was, say, 7.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people will just read stuff and not really care about that, so, this is more our own...
I didn't expect it from Clarke.
That's the thing.
The first two Rama books are, like, tight as a drum. Like, they are expertly plotted. They are expertly... They're carefully put out piece by piece by piece, and it builds up, and it's excellent. And then I just picked this up thinking, ooh, I'm going to have another experience like reading one of the Rama books, and I did not.
Well, it's one of them things where it's like, you can kind of feel the influence of one author a lot more than the other. Like to give an example of a much better book, Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman's Good Omens reads way, way more like a Terry Pratchett book than a Neil Gaiman book. You can feel Neil Gaiman's influence in there, especially with all the mythological stuff.
Sure.
But as far as the writing style goes, if someone had just told me that Terry Pratchett wrote the book, I would have believed it 100%. And if someone had presented it to me and said, who wrote this book, I would have guessed Terry Pratchett. And if someone had said, this is a Neil Gaiman book, I would have been like, this doesn't sound much like Neil Gaiman.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll have to read a little bit more Pohl to see if, like, these kinds of issues are prevalent in his work. I'm not sure.
I'm not too familiar with Frederik Pohl. I know I've seen his name either, a lot. I've probably read a few
how it
things.
is. He's got like 1 million stories under his belt, and he's a Hugo Award winner back when the Hugo Award meant something, I think, and stuff like that.
That far back? Wow.
Yeah, I mean they're both old. They both died.
Well, Arthur C. Clarke is old enough that there's an Arthur C. Clarke Award that also used to be worth something.
Well, no, but Arthur C. Clarke died in 2008, I think.
Yeah, I was actually shocked when I heard that, because I thought he died in like the 90s.
Yeah, and then Pohl died in like 2013 or 2014 or something like that. So, like, not very separate. They were both very old when they wrote this book, so maybe like they just kind of like didn't care that much anymore. But I don't know. I mean,
leave me alone. I'm done. Just there's these two poor men being tortured by an editor somewhere or a publisher somewhere.
Well, like, they both wrote introductions, like, independent introductions for themselves, and, like, Arthur C. Clarke's was read like Arthur C. Clarke, and Frederik Pohl read like someone who thinks that he knows everything about number theory because he read a bunch of things about number theory on Wikipedia. But at least he sounded enthusiastic and interested in the process, and yet somehow by the end of this book, they were just like, I don't know, ion drives.
Maybe they just both wrote their introductions and fell asleep, and then the editor was just like, you know what, I'll just fill in the rest.
Maybe. So that's really all I have on the book. I don't know if you have any other things to poke at or questions about the book itself.
I mean, I don't know. I think that is probably just a case of two authors who were too old and tired for that novel.
Yeah, possibly. They sure didn't sound like it from their introductions, but the result of the full book was surprising. I'll say that if I decide to go back and read some more Arthur C. Clarke, I will be going back to the Rama books or the Odyssey books, and I will not be reading The Last Theorem once again.
Yeah, and I'll be avoiding that novel because I'm sure I'll come across plenty of other books.
There's plenty of other good things to write that are much better.
Well, there's plenty of other novels that are bad that I'm going to be telling you about in the future, I'm sure, so...
Well, we can do these half blind, or we can do these, together, in the sense that, like, if you find a book that you want to do a full review on, both of us, we can do that too. Just let me know, and I can swing by the library and pick it up, or swing on Amazon and pick it up. And
all right.
everything will be good there. So, but yeah, here's our first half-blind review on Wordy Pair.
And now that we're at the end of it, let's. I mean, do we kind of want to leave the reason for the name hanging in the air, or do we want to explain it at all, or do we want to try and remember what our acronym was?
Oh goodness!
It was 2WA. I can't remember what the W. It was like.
I know I wrote it down somewhere. I would have to.
Something like well-written association or written word association. It was written. Was it written word association?
It was written word association. Yeah, 2WA. Yeah, written word it was either written word architects or written word association.
I think association's fine.
I have written word architects in the logo that I made, but
for as much thought as we put into this, we just now are deciding on that.
Well, so you've mentioned anime a couple of times, and so the for anyone who's not aware, Wordy Pair is also a play on a title of a science fiction series from Japan.
Yeah, it started as a science fiction, as a set of 5 science fiction novels, 2 of which were actually published in the U.S. They were called The Dirty Pair, and it was these 2 women that worked for an association for hire that would troubleshoot problems in a galactic universe. And the association they worked for was called the 3WA, and they were often referred to as the best agents of the 3WA. So we kind of just took that, called it the Wordy Pair, and called ourselves the best agents of the 2WA, and that's the joke.
Yep.
It's not as funny when I explain it, I guess, but I reckon not too many people would actually figure this one out. So what the hey?
It needed explaining, and it's a reference that a certain group of people are going to get, and a certain group of people are not. And so at least now everybody knows what the heck Wordy Pair refers to.
And it's something we love.
They're good novels too. I read one of them. And,
they are my favorite science fiction novels. The 2 that were published here are the only ones that I've fully read, but they are 2 of my favorite science fiction novels. Like there's a handful of stories that compare, but I think I could go back and read them more than just about anything else. You know, a few exceptions. Like if we're counting Jurassic Park as science fiction, I've read Jurassic Park 10 times. If we're counting
Jurassic Park is science fiction, yes.
Yeah, I mean, virtually there are a few exceptions. Like some of Michael Crichton's work was not science fiction. Like Eaters of the Dead was not science fiction. Travels was not science fiction.
That's fair, but the book in which he hypothesizes regenerating dinosaurs through cloning techniques is science fiction.
I'm just, some people look at it as fantasy. I don't know. You know,
does anyone? No one looks.
There are people that have looked at Jurassic Park as fantasy. I have always looked at it as science fiction. Actually, if I had to pick a book that I do like better than the Dirty Pair books, now they're science fiction, but they're more like action adventure science fiction.
Sure, they're very pulpy.
Yeah, like Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
But if I had to pick an actual like just science fiction book that I would say I like better than Dirty Pair, it'd probably be The Andromeda Strain. That might be my favorite science fiction.
I love that book. I wish the movie was not horrible.
The original movie wasn't too bad. It just didn't compare to the book at all. Like I can sit down and watch that movie at least. You know, I could watch that movie once a month if I wanted to sit down to the same movie once a month. No problem.
I found the movie interminably dull, but the book is not dull at all.
Yeah, the book is fantastic. It's easily beats even you know like Jurassic Park even doesn't compare to it, and I love Michael Crichton's books.
And we've both read the sequel to War of the Worlds, so we might do a review of that at some point.
No, we both haven't. I read half of it, and then I put
gave up?
No, I put it on a shelf, and I went to a Barnes & Noble, bought 6 books, stacked them on top of it, forgot I had it, and only just the other day unstacked those books and found what was it called again? Massacre of Mankind.
Massacre of Mankind, yeah.
With the bookmark still in it, and I was like, oh.
Whoops. Well, that might be a project for the next episode, whenever that happens.
Yeah, I could finish up reading that.
I'll give it another glance over, because it was a good book. So yeah, I guess we'll call it here. Do you have anything else that you want to touch on shortly, or anything like that?
Oh, maybe next time we can, tentatively discuss things like theme, because I know a lot of people put stock into theme in stories, and I think there's a lot of belief around what theme is and how important it is that needs a bit of throttling, or maybe
okay, sure.
Let's just call it a second opinion.
Yeah.
And briefly, I would probably say that I've never really considered what the theme of a story is that I'm writing until I'm done writing it, and then I can look back and be like, so what's the overall theme here? And even then, it's like, I only really think about it if, someone says something to prompt me to think about it. I do not think you need to focus on what a theme is unless that's the only thing that, you really care about in your story.
Well, the thing about theme is that if you focus entirely on theme, you end up making a book that sounds preachy, generally speaking, is what happens. But we'll talk more about that in the maybe in the next episode.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right. Well, this has been episode 1 of the Wordy Pair podcast. Coming soon to every place that you listen to podcasts, maybe, if I can figure out how to do that. With help. I'll help you. We'll figure it out. Anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.